Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the MetaManiacs show. This is the podcast for and by trading card game maniacs. I'm your host, Dan, as usual, and I'm joined here by Dylan Straube.
What's up?
We have Jordan Syverson.
Welcome.
And Kevin Kerrigan.
What's up, hot boys and gamer girls?
So today, this is episode number 11, and as you saw in the title, we are talking about the Perfect TCG. And you may have taken my clickbait, and I apologize for that if you did, because we're not actually going to be talking about which TCG is the very best, because I don't actually think there is a perfect TCG right now, and I think there's a lot of great ones that you can play with a lot of positives and some negatives to all of them. But what we are going to talk about today, this is a topic that was suggested by Kevin here, and we're happy to have Kevin back again to go into this with us. The idea that every TCG probably can be improved in some way. And what would happen if we were to take our favorite aspects of current TCGs, past TCGs, and just ideas for potential future ones and combine them, Frankenstein them into some kind of perfect TCG. But I'm not going to jabber on about that. What I'm going to do is, since Kevin suggested this, I'm going to let Kevin go ahead and lead the way on the conversation. So have at it, Kev.
Thanks, and thanks for having me back on again. Glad to be back. Yeah, the conversation started because I saw a video in the DBS group from, I can't remember the name of the content creator, I apologize. We'll probably put the link in the show description. But he was talking about how Wizards and Konami, in his opinion, have been dropping the ball lately, and this is a perfect time for DBS to kind of take advantage of that and do what they can to move up a little. And it got me to thinking about what other games could do to improve their respective aspects. Because like Dan said, there's a lot of good games, and and all of these games like excel in some areas and kind of drag in some others. That's just how it goes with these things. And so the conversation turned into, if we could just take bits and pieces from every game that we like, and like you said, fuse them together into the ultimate god homunculus card game. And I just have a couple of things that I think are important that I think every game can improve from. And one of the most important, I feel, and this is specific to games that are based on a specific IP. And what I think is, you have to use the IP effectively. As much as we like DBS, one of the things that I don't like about it is that it doesn't feel like Dragon Ball. The system is very generic across the board. You could slap any IP on that system and it would work, as opposed to something like Scorzy, Fanzy, Pansy, which really does feel like Dragon Ball. And I think UVS is a great example of this, because the game was designed to be a card game version of a fighting game, and you can feel that from every aspect of how the game works. It feels like a trading card game of a fighting game. And I think when a game doesn't utilize its IP, it's a real waste.
Boy, there's a lot to unpack there. I think there's some really interesting points you make. One way I always like to put this is, every game does some amount of what's the term again? Some amount of simulation is what I'm trying to say, of whatever sort of IP or just whatever property they're attempting to simulate, right? And they do some amount of abstraction. Every game does this, not even just trading card games. We're talking about board games and stuff too. You can look at the driest Euro board game, which if people aren't familiar, it would mean it's just a mechanical game about, resource management, economy, whatever, and it really doesn't matter what sort of... What's that?
Birds flying.
Well, yeah, it could be like Wingspan is a great example if we want to bring up an actual game, where there's, it's a quite mechanical game, and it really doesn't exactly matter what's on top. But even Wingspan is a great example of this, where it's got there is some amount of theme to it in how many, I'm going to get very specific here if people aren't familiar with Wingspan, but how many eggs can be laid for each one, which biome the birds go into, etc. But then again,
they have?
Yeah, exactly. The food they can eat for sure. But then you have things like ducks draw cards. And that's true in the game. Basically every duck is a card drawing card, but what does that mean mechanically or in the simulation of a sort of bird watching.
A closet ornithologist.
Our ducks are always in large groups. If you see one duck, there's got to be a couple more ducks somewhere else.
Okay, well, you know what, Jordan, and I love that you're saying that, because I think a lot of these games, you can always come up with some sort of reasoning for like why this happens, but what it comes down to is sort of the player's suspension of disbelief. And it's, you know, how far do they have to kind of explain away mechanics to make them make sense versus how intuitively do you just, oh, I understand why, you know. And so your example of Scorzy is great because Scorzy directly had a resource called anger. You gain anger and then you level up. There's basically nothing your brain has to do, no gymnastics you have to do to come up with like why the system exists. It's just, yeah, they get angrier and then they get stronger. That's just kind of like
that's the show.
DBZ in a nutshell thing. But at the same time, Super does, you know, Super is maybe a little more on the mechanical and the abstract side than it is on the simulation side. But they do things where they have characters that look for other characters that want to be together. They're trying to get you to build decks.
There's
to
some flavor, yeah,
some amount of theme. But I agree, you could paste a lot of stuff on top of it. I do think that's the case for universes too, though. And I think like we're seeing that as they delve into anime a little more. That like the fighting game thing? I get it. I think if we're going to talk about a game that simulates fighting games, Jordan, you're going to love that. I'm going to say Exceed is probably one of the best I've played. That isn't a trading card game again, but that simulates a fighting game system really well. And so that's, you know, but what I'm saying is that I don't think it's a positive or negative either way. It's totally a taste thing, right? And it's if you are someone who just wants to get into that simulation without having to do the gymnastics or just have more stronger flavor-based decisions in how the mechanics work in the game, there are games that are better at that for you. If you don't care about it as much, and then that's totally fine. And that, to your point, then your ultimate point, Kevin, is that you would prefer if they would get stronger into the theme, and that's totally fair.
Yeah, and I think you're right as far as UVS goes. When they do the sets that aren't fighting game, like Yu Yu Hakusho, they do a great job of making those cards feel like they represent the characters.
I mean, yeah,
they only pick fighting franchise, like
yes,
where action is a big feature.
Yeah,
it's much easier than if they were to pick some like
Wild Thornberries.
They're not picking shoujos. They're picking shonen.
It's not White Schwartz. We're not picking, you know, Idol series.
American Idol, because there's a card game for that. We can talk about how good that was.
I'd like to say also the perfect card game does exist. It's called the Austin Powers trading card game.
Oh my god!
I believe it.
Okay, but to springboard off what you're saying, Kevin, to get into the flavor of a game, one thing I really do enjoy in a card game is when, and I think I'm backed up by a lot of people in looking at not only some of the games that we like to play, and Dragon Ball Super and Universes, but also in the popularity of like Commander and the Magic world. I like a game where you get to pick a single character, creature, something to build your deck around. I think that's super fun. As a content creator or well, all of us probably feel similarly here. I really like when I can just make a video thumbnail and it's Yusuke versus Bakugo. And I don't have to go like, this is, you know, red-green adventures
tempo,
with, you know, tempo thing versus blue-black, you know, like whatever. It's like, it's just more complicated.
Made up D&D word.
Yeah. It's nice from that perspective just to be able to slap here. You want to watch these two characters fight? You can.
And it's nicer for a spectator as well, because it's easier to like see a thumbnail and see like this person versus this person and understand what that means versus being like, I need to read 4 sentences to understand what this matchup even is.
It is easier simply to get into the game when you can say, hey, here's a Goku deck. And you go, okay, Goku, like, cool, Goku. I play Goku. Versus here is a yellow Goku's Lineage tempo deck that uses the Victory Strike, you know, whatever.
If we want to talk about games that do that flavor both well and poorly, I would say the Final Fantasy TCG falls right square into that.
All right, go for it.
So like like you said, it's easy to throw like Yusuke versus Bakugo, right? You could easily throw that and be like, okay, this is what's happening. The Final Fantasy TCG, like just a while ago, actually, I made a post about the Fire Ice Final Fantasy VI versus, it was like a mirror match, or I can't remember what it was. And somebody took issue with me saying, well, it was a Fire Ice Final Fantasy VI. And I was like, well, but because it is, but there were also, like, there was some truth to what they said. That not every card in the deck was a Final Fantasy VI card. And even though there are Final Fantasy VI cards, like, the mechanics of them aren't always, like, super, like, they do a pretty good job of making, like, the characters pretty indicative of what they do in the game. There's a lot of there's actually, like, a lot of posts on the Reddit of, like, people that will analyze, like, the card's design and be like, this is how it plays in the game. Like, I know, like, Shadow, if you bring out the backup Interceptor, Shadow from Final Fantasy VI, Shadow gains haste and plus 1,000 power, and, like, Interceptor in Final Fantasy VI was, like, the dog that Shadow played with. So, like, it was kind of cool that, like, with his dog, like, he's got, like, more benefits, right? And there's also, like, a red standard unit card that's it's the bad guys, like, the generic bad guys from the intro of I believe it's just Shinra soldiers. Where when one comes out, it fetches another one, and then that fetches another one. So, like,
the jobbers.
That's how it came in, where they'd come in waves, and, like, if you didn't kill them fast enough, like, more would come out. So, like, there's fun flavor like that in the game, but then people can just get annoyed that they're like, well, yeah, but the job class system does literally nothing. Like, there's a few very specific times when, like, the job system is used, and from people who have played Final Fantasy in general would recognize that your job is actually a pretty important part of like, the game, of, like, the class system, of the games, rather. And the job system, like Job Thief, like Locke from Final Fantasy VI is a thief. Zidane from Final Fantasy IX is a thief. Garnet is a princess. Now, there are a few set cards that say search for Job Princess or Job Thief, right? Or Job Dragoon. Dragoon's a big one. Like, I would say there's, like, Dragoon, Chocobo, and Moogle. Like, those are, like, the three actual jobs that sometimes matter. But almost always, the benefit that Magic has, to bring some of the Magic players maybe back into the conversation for a second, is that Magic has a pretty simple system, right? So they have, like, a devotion system where it's as many, let's say your devotion to red would be how many fire lands do you have? That would give you a bonus.
Fire symbols and permanents you control.
Perfect. Yeah. Fire symbols and permanents. Thank you. Or they would have when this card attacks all knights gain some effect, right? First strike or haste or +1/+1. And that's really clean because a lot of Magic's characters are a human something or a dragon something or a something knight. Or, like, it's just, like, a pretty generic job system. And I don't mean generic in a bad way. I mean it in a great way.
Yep.
So that, like,
it's very D&D.
Yeah, so, like, all wizards gain whatever. And I don't know I'm sure there's wizards in Magic, but I'm just throwing out words here.
In fact, they're on the coast.
Yeah, in Final Fantasy, that's not as clean. Because a lot of the times they'll say all Category 6 forwards gain blank. Which category is what game you're from, right? So all Category 7 forwards are blank. So, like, when Barrett enters the field, he deals 2,000 damage for each Category 7 character you control. That's awesome, right? So, like, that's a lot of synergy in the game, but there's not synergy, like, among jobs, like you may expect. So, I don't know. I maybe I'm going off a little bit, but I think that the game does it well in some aspects, and then it just dumpsters some other aspects.
So let me bring it back then. Dylan, what would you prefer to see in the Perfect trading card game? Do you want it to be more do you want it to be more focused on the flavor or more cohesive throughout the thing? Do you want more effects that are like search for a warrior of light, search for a thief?
They do that. But so that's what I was going to say. The weird thing is, it's like the job system's kind of forgotten sometimes, because it'll say, this is how they clear it up. On the card design, the card text, it'll say, search for one card name Warrior of Light or job Warrior of Light.
Yep.
So you can search for a literal Warrior of Light, or you can search for, let's say, Wall from Brave Exvius, whose job is Warrior of Light, but his name is just WOL, which is, if we're all playing the game of what does that mean, Warrior of Light is what it means.
Oh my god!
But there are some, like, I can't remember. I know there's some like Sarah is a Warrior of Light, and I believe that's from Final Fantasy 11 or Final Fantasy Legends. But so that my point is that, like, the card design space, if allows for it, you can do both. I think we just mentioned earlier, Panini Dragon Ball Z did a great job of doing both, where if you controlled a certain character, you would have allies that could help you without having to make that game state that allowed them to do their actions. So, like, if you were Goku, your Chi-Chi could block it with Chi-Chi, as Mike Piper would say. Chi-Chi could actively help block. Or if you had Goku and your son Gohan or Goten, they could do stuff for you without you meeting the normal requirements to use their abilities, because they're family members. And the same thing for, like, Goten. If you have Goten, Trunks, for people who know Dragon Ball Z, Goten and Trunks are like best friends. Could do stuff like that. Or people that are more... Sorry, Dan, you look like you have a thing to say.
Well, I think people get the point, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of examples.
I just think there's a lot of flavor there.
What I'm going to do is make you commit to something here, because the purpose of this, as much as I'd love to just discuss flavor in trading card games the whole time, the purpose of this is to come up with what we think would be the best trading card game. And what you've described are games that cover a gamut of having, forced flavor integration versus a mix of here's tribal flavor and here's non-tribal flavor, to games that are like, just put whatever you want in the deck and it'll work. And there's plenty of games like that too.
For the best TCG,
what do you prefer?
I think mechanics trump everything. You're not going to play the game if you don't enjoy the mechanics. But in order for mechanics to be fun, you need to have flavor. Otherwise, you're just going to go play solitaire. Like, you might as well be playing, solitaire with Goku's face on it. Which there are cards like that. Like, you can go buy a Dragon Ball Z playing card deck.
Yeah, I think if you're using an IP, if you're not utilizing it at least a little bit, then what's the point?
Well, money, buddy.
Well, exactly. Well, of course, that's from the company's perspective, but as a player, it's like, I want to play X game because I like X show, I like X game, so that has to be considered at least a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that's the primary reason that I don't play Dragon Ball Super. The primary reason that I don't play Dragon Ball Super is not because, in order for it to be birthed, Panini Z had to die. It's because I don't think it does nearly as much as Panini did to symbolize Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball as a franchise.
I 100% agree. There's a reason the only deck I play is Android 21, because I like the character. If that character was in a different game, I would play a different game.
I think they've been very hit or miss on whether their leaders really connect with the flavor or not. There are, especially early on, and I think that was every TCG starts off a little rougher and refines over time,
including
so Panini
Z.
A huge knock on the game or whatever.
Panini Z, yeah.
Yeah. But for Super, a lot of the first set leaders, really, there was just the inkling of flavor. Then Broly could destroy stuff. Frieza Frieza was probably Golden Frieza was in set 1 was probably like the most flavorful because he specifically was like trying to put out Frieza's army, had that like tribal thing that Dylan was talking about in Final Fantasy and Magic and everything going on. But a lot of them was like Goku untaps energy and then and they all had just generic attack to draw cards and everything. So they've gotten better over time. They're a lot more interesting now, but still I think they just like drop the ball on things that are like, well, this leader gets quadruple strike if your opponent has a bunch of things out.
So
I also think
you couldn't tell me which character that was. If I just told you that effect, could you tell me what character has that from Dragon Ball?
I also think that goes back to the fact that DBS just has a more broad, basic gameplay system. There's only so much you can do in that system to make it specific.
See, I wanted to ask Jordan a question because Jordan's been silent as the grave for a while, as Jordan tends to be when other people are talking.
He's very respectful.
Jordan.
Yes.
Is this correct? My thoughts of what I think Dan's saying a lot is sprinkles of flavor. Okay? So some cards, like Broly can destroy things, right? Frieza can play tribally and bring stuff out. So in contrast to Panini, where you play as the character, right? So you level up as Goku. And you are Goku. Like, I feel like the Panini was like an action RPG where you picked up the role player of the character that you wanted to represent. And then you had attacks and effects that, I mean, there are specific cards that only you as Yamcha, or only you as Vegeta, or Goku, or Frieza, or Ginyu, God rest his soul, could play. So, like, I feel like, so Dan's talking about sprinkles of flavor, like from Final Fantasy TCG, where Locke makes you discard a card because he's a thief, like he steals resources from you, or when you just mentioned, like, again, Broly destroying things. Whereas Panini, like, I feel like that system, and I don't know the history of it, kind of was built upon you playing the character. Do you feel like that's a good read? And like, so like the flavor's in the cake, right? It was baked in the layers of the cake as opposed to frosting on top. Like, I feel like Dragon Ball Super's...
Ooh, cake.
Dragon Ball Super... You got to bring a little Mike Piper into the conversation. Dragon Ball Super's mechanics are a gelatin cake. They're whatever cake that they wanted to put on it. And then they said, all right,
it's
the
fruit cake of game design.
Yeah, let's sprinkle some Dragon Ball Super on top of there. Maybe poke some holes in the cake, you know, and add some, like, Dragon Ball Super in the middle. But, like, the cake was the mechanics. The cake was already there. The recipe was there. And then, like, Dragon Ball Super was put on it. You know, and people latched onto it. Obviously, like, there's a lot of good stuff to the game design and why people play it, right? Like, 4 of us have played Dragon Ball Super. Like, 100% of the people on this podcast have played it or do play it. Versus Panini Z, I feel like was constructed with the idea. You know, like, it was planted and brought up. What do you think?
I'm going to diverge completely from the question.
Okay.
Just to so we can bring us back to the core of I want to bring us back to the core of everything. So, instead of the direct question, I'm just going to go over what I think theme-wise I would expect, and then kind of branch into something that isn't related to theme whatsoever.
Sure.
So,
okay.
With flavor, I think it's very dependent on the game at hand. Simply because I'm going to add this because with everything you guys are talking about, I agree for the most part, but you're also discounting one different thing. What if this card game is based on a new franchise or a brand new IP that's not established? How can you tell what flavorful is if you don't have something that's very recognizable like Pokemon or, you know, Dragon Ball or something? Like, there's nothing for you as a new person being newly exposed to it to attach to or be like, yeah, that's flavorful, because what is flavorful for this new characters or these new universe that you know nothing about? So I think it needs to have it's going to sound dumb because this is going to be similar to what a lot of my responses are going to be today. Spoiler alert for later. But I think that has to strike the perfect balance. There needs to be some amount of flavor in it because me personally, I like when there's flavor hooks in it. It makes it interesting, but there is a downside to this double-edged sword. If there's too much flavor in the game, it both from a design perspective, highly constricts what they can do with card design because they shoehorn themselves into having to have flavor and everything. And it also makes the gameplay meta a bit stale. Because, for example, I'll just take in a vacuum set 1 of DBZ. 90% of the decks, including the top tier decks in set 1 DBZ, were literally shoehorned into they built themselves because there was too many obvious choices that went with said archetype. And it was so powerful on its own where like there was no build diversity whatsoever because it's like, why would I run anything else when I get benefits for running the flavor pieces?
Also,
Versus-
Namekian was busted.
Yeah, Namekian was broken.
Yeah, but I mean, like, in general, like, it also is because, like, once you start opening up venues that are less flavorful, it adds more options that you might not have run if there was a flavorful option that you got this extra benefit that you can't get with any other character kind of deal. So there needs to be enough flavor pieces, and I'm going to reference Scores/Panini Z because I feel like Panini Z struck a perfect balance because there was, like you said, there's specific character cards where, like, either only that character can use it, or this character uses this really well. But there wasn't so many where the decks felt like they built themselves because it was like, oh, I'm obviously going to use.
I'm going to use all 50
Destructo
trunk
discs,
cards. Yeah,
the best.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
like,
it's sorry.
That's okay.
Go
But
ahead.
I'll just continue on real quick because the main thing I also want to realize is I like opening to new IPs as well. Like I love, don't get me wrong, I love card games that are based off of my favorite IPs, but those things were not always my favorite IPs. And there's also certain card games that I played in the past that was literally a brand new IP or stuff that I just didn't even know. For example, I'll just take it because it's fresh. UFS, Red Horizon really intrigued me. Now, I didn't play UFS first. I played Exceed. So, like, I didn't know what Red Horizon really was until I played Exceed, and I really digged the characters. And now I get what the flavor of all those characters are. But at the time I didn't. So the fact that their effects were both flavorful but just broadly accessible and like just broad helped a lot because it helped me get into it and it helped me get attached to those characters. And then there was just enough flavor that once I did get attached to the characters, I'm like, oh, sick. I get why this is this way because it feels like the character.
It also helps with Red Horizon because a lot of those characters are based on strong established archetypes. So even if you don't know those characters per se, you look at someone like Vincent Gray and you're like, oh, he's the M. Bison. So even if you don't know those specific characters, they did a really good job of communicating what kind of character this is that you can then get attached to it.
I think if we wanted to talk about like a unifying, a perfect unification between game design and flavor, you could look at Smash Bros. Just look at the most recent characters that have come to Super Smash Bros. Yeah, look at who's the guy from Minecraft that just came in? Steve from Minecraft.
Oh God!
If you want to play with Steve, you literally need to dig up things to get weapons and like there's all sorts of like wonderful flavor. Or Mega Man. Mega Man's like the only character that doesn't have like a base punch ability, and he's like strictly range. So like he has to shoot pellets, or he has to charge up and shoot pellets, and all of his abilities are abilities from the games. Like I think that was my point when Dan was like, you need to pick one, which I understand. I totally understand because I can be very wishy-washy and that's an issue. But I agree with you 100%. If there isn't a middle ground between the two, either are going to feel obtuse.
Yes. And now I want to also like I said, transition to a different topic that's not related to flavor because there's so many more aspects to a card game and we've only touched on one and it's been like a half hour. So expediting it along to shift the conversation, I want to cover a mechanic that is honestly not present in very many card games at all, and it really saddens me. And I really wish it was in more games because I feel like as a player, it both opens up the card pool design and it opens up strategic decision making during the game that is just not present and can't really be done. Exceed does it a little, and the best way I've ever seen it done, surprisingly enough, is a PS2 Yu-Gi-Oh game. If anyone
Duelist of Roses, Duelist of Roses.
If anyone's played Duelist of Roses,
Duelist of Roses.
So sad that there is no
Wow. We went there.
Like card mechanic. It works perfectly because cards are already square.
Hold on. Repeat the mechanic. Repeat the mechanic.
Okay,
Everyone kind of like blew up when you said Duelist of
it.
Roses.
What happens is in that game, you pick like a main character. The character doesn't actually have abilities. It's just your avatar that moves around the map. There's I believe it's like a 7x7 grid, and your starting character starts in the middle of your side, and your opponent starts in the air. You'll move during your turn, and with some card effects, you'll move your avatar, I think it's up to 2 spaces in orthogonal ways, and you can move around this battle grid. When you play your creature cards, you play them on the battle grid, and they move around, and they can attack, do all the stuff you'd expect in a card game, but you also have to think of this spacing mechanic. In addition to that, there was they leaned into it heavily, so there was a lot of card effects that manipulated the space as well. So it wasn't just like, oh, I'm walking.
Jordan's
on this
literally
grid.
just like every game should be Dungeon Dice Monsters.
Because there would be like each
Somebody
tile
start
would be
playing
given
Sexy
like,
back.
and I understand it'll be a little bit rougher in non-video space, because in video games it's really easy to set that board up. But in the game, there was different tiles, like a mountain tile, for example. If you're familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! At all, your air types have a bonus when they're on mountains, and it doesn't have to be that crazy. I mean, just an interaction with a grid would be nice, because
So
like I
you're
said, it
saying,
adds
like,
another layer of decision making.
A fusion between like a card game and a board game, like where you bring trading card game mechanics into like a preset battlefield.
Yes,
That sounds really cool.
I am so excited to talk right now. Jordan,
I'm
I
glad.
want you to
Hero Clicks
brace
kind of
yourself.
does that.
Brace yourself.
Dan's like, there is a game.
Everyone, this is my time, okay? It is called Battlegrid TCG. It currently exists. It has a grid that you play your creatures to that has spots on it where you get to draw extra cards, where things have interactions with each other. I have never played it. It is a smaller indie TCG.
That sounds neat.
But I've seen stuff about it. I think they're just trying to gain traction. It's kind of, I think it's being self-published even right now or something. But Jordan, if you really want to try that in a current card game that exists, it's called Battlegrid TCG, and you can learn about it at battletcg.com.
Did you pull it up?
Today's
as
episode
talking?
sponsored by.
No, dude, we should have an extra
no, we are
MetaManiacs
not
show.
sponsored.
Let's have an extra episode where we play this.
Sure.
We could print. I mean, I'm not sure if you could purchase it or if we just have to like print off current versions, or maybe contact
we'll
them.
look into it. We'll look into it as an option. But
That sounds great.
But yeah, Jordan. So there's good news. A game like that actually exists right now.
That sounds awesome. So Jordan, you're saying that more TCGs could
yes,
fuse
because I know
the
there are a
mechanics
few
of
that have
TCGs.
battle grids, but I want one that checks all the boxes in addition to having a battle grid.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you
and
think
so you want it
that's
to maybe
cool?
have like an IP you love, and
Yeah, because there's been a couple that have been out recently, and they're not like
Duelist of
bad
Roses
games per se.
2.
They just weren't great, or they'd have like the worst card art and card like UI
Okay.
possible. So
I have
And then-
one. Sorry,
I wanted to talk about one last thing.
no, please.
okay,
The
let
next
Jordan
thing I want to
finish.
get
Yeah.
into is the perfect card game needs, and this is stemming from like having played, like put 2 of the opposite wheel examples, having just started playing UFS and then playing Digimon. The card
Mhm.
design and UI must be clean and concise. Going from UFS, which, let's be honest, it's getting better with universes,
Messy.
but the older cards are some of the grossest cards possible.
They're
And the
a nightmare.
Digimon card, the new
They don't
Digimon
look
2020, are the cleanest, sharpest, concise cards I've ever played in a card game.
Well,
They look great.
I was just talking to somebody about this, where UFS to UVS transitions. UFS looks like they paid a graphic designer that they could afford to design trading card games. In
Graphic
UVS
design is my
looks like
passion.
UVS looks like they paid a graphic designer that knows what they're doing and has experience with TCGs. So like UVS is a totally different, like most of the same information is on the card. It's just so much more readable.
So much more clear at a glance too.
I no, yeah, that's
Absolutely.
readability.
Looks
Yeah, no,
modern
I
and
agree.
nice.
So I have one thing that I wanted to mention. I'm a little blurry. It's okay. We'll come back in. There we go. I've got one thing that I wanted to say that nobody's talked about, and it's a super simple thing that I think every trading card game needs to nail, or I'm not playing it. Interaction. I need
that's not
what I thought you were gonna
every single trading card game needs a high level of interactability, and now I don't know what that entails, but the designers need to keep that in mind when they're designing their TCGs. I've been turned off a few games. Metacross was one that I felt had sort of issues with like interaction on like your opponent's turn and stuff like that, where some people felt that was good. I just felt that it limited the game space and it made me feel like I wasn't playing as, like, you know what I mean? We talked on last podcast about playing the game, right? That was my main, like, little gripe of Magic the Gathering, was some of the games were non-games, and it was a very small percentage and stuff like that. But
yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh has a big problem with that.
yeah, so sure. I don't know. I haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh in years, but I would go to say any issue that results in the people playing your game feel like they're not playing. You know what I mean? Like they might be watching somebody else play the game while they wait their turn to play the game. I don't like that. So I think every game needs a strong interaction core.
The best example of that is Pokemon. That
I have no idea. I've literally never played the Pokemon TCG. Please
that's right.
Carry
Yeah.
on.
So
it's
Pokemon
like solitaire games.
Pokemon has, other than the occasional effect that it has to, like, specifically say it's used on both players' turns, which is like going to be on like an evolved Pokemon or something. It'll be on board. It'll be noticeable. There's no hand traps. There's no instance or anything you can play on your opponent's turn. Turns are quite, like, structured. It's just you're going to play your stuff, then you're going to perform an attack with your Pokemon, and
Sure.
then your opponent has
Very
their
much
full
like
turn.
the game.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, they were trying to, in their defense, for sure. In their defense, it's simulating a turn-based battle between Pokemon, like in
Sure.
the Pokemon game. So I totally get it. I'm not saying it's bad for that, but if you want that interaction, Pokemon is very much your turn is your sacred space. You do all your stuff in it, and then you pass the turn. Then your opponent does all their stuff.
Do you feel like that might be one of the reasons that they may have simplified the design space and the card space because their core audience, that they were maybe not their core audience, that might be everybody's core audience is currently 30-year-old men. But do you feel like maybe they were trying to pitch towards children like Pokemon does? Because I know a lot of kids really like the Pokemon TCG.
It was designed by Wizards of the Coast. So this wasn't people who
I
were
didn't know
like,
that. I didn't know
yes,
that.
it was designed by Wizards of the Coast in conjunction with the Pokemon Company, and they were not. These aren't people who are like, I've never done a TCG. Let's just try some stuff, right? These guys did Magic, so they know what's going on, and they intentionally designed the game to simulate turn-based battles with the and I guarantee with the intention of having a simplified resource system where you just put resources on the Pokemon directly, so you know who has what and everything, and trainers that you play on your turn, and you just do what they say and then discard them and everything. There was nothing complicated, really. It was made so that you could just get into it and start playing.
That's cool.
And I agree with you completely too. I want my games to have interaction to some degree. And I'll go ahead and say, actually, I think, Kevin, what you were getting at with the Yu-Gi-Oh hit was that Yu-Gi-Oh is very much a, like, here's my turn, here's my crazy combo. I knocked my mic. Here's my crazy combo, and you have no time to respond to this.
Counterspell.
And you're going to lose now.
Yeah. Basically, it's I win the die roll. I'm going to play solitaire for 20 minutes, and you lose.
However, I'm going to say that the initial design of Yu-Gi-Oh, being terribly balanced and just like not very well designed from the perspective of there are multiple different archetypes of decks you can play and everything right away. The basic design of having traps that you have to set up and then activate on your opponent's turn,
That's super
neat.
neat.
Is a cool design. I really like that.
Oh, yeah. It definitely didn't start that way. It devolved into the way it is now. But the core base of what they had was a great start.
Yes.
And I do have one thing I would like to bring up. That's because we've been talking a lot about things... things within gameplay, but talking about outside of gameplay, I think everything a good game needs is that it needs communication with the developers, with the people who make the game, because there's nothing worse than when you play a game and the company that makes it might as well exist on Mars.
Lord, preach.
For how much for how much they communicate with the player base. And I think, again, RIP, Transformers was great with how they interacted with the community. And obviously not taking everything they say at face value, because, there's constructive criticism and a lot of people don't offer constructive criticism. But there has to be that back and forth with the player base. I think that's a key factor.
I totally agree. That's a great point. That was another one. That was one of my points that I had, like, in running up to it, had thought about. I think that's incredibly important. and I believe even within a game. So like the games are now so globalized that it's often really hard to have like one marketing team speak to everyone. I mean, regardless of like language barriers, cultural barriers, sociological factors.
For sure.
So even within a game, a lot of the times, like, I will say it because I don't believe they watch this podcast. I believe the EU team of Final Fantasy is the peak team, and I believe the North American team kind of stumbles a bit. And I know people on both sides. I enjoy both sides of people a lot. They're both very respectable, wonderful teams. But man, Tim Schilder kicks the crap out of the NA squad. And I believe I believe he actually just proposed to the other person on his team. So they're a great engaged duo, and they do amazing things. And I hope, if any way, Tim, you end up listening to this podcast, just know that my heart goes out to you. And everybody in North America loves themselves a German boy. So,
Their TCG's only married news team? Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, yes, I believe. Like
Mazel tov.
they literally they got engaged within like the last month.
That was a Tim and Eric reference. I don't know if anyone got it. But...
I've listened to some, but no, I missed it. But they're great.
I want to say that I think, as far as communication, I don't think anyone is perfect. Any TCG company is perfect.
Agreed.
But I think one of the ones I like the best is Jasco. For what they do.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Just to preface that with
every podcast, we're like, Jasco Games does it right.
They do this right.
They do.
But it's a little easier for them because their game is actually a little smaller than some of the other ones. It's not as global as the other games.
But
and
they do give out cards.
That helps a lot.
In championships.
It gets a lot more difficult when things are more global to get communication across. But Jasco does a great job of, I think, listening to the players and trying to communicate as they can. I think a lot of us would like to know more about the timeline of the next set release,
honestly,
whenever it is.
Right now, I'm not excited to spend $300 on Final Fantasy in November.
Yeah.
I'm not. And so, like, I would prefer that Final Fantasy TCG just keep saying, hey, we're here, we're sticking with you, we'll release some promotional material and stuff, but until further notice, Opus 12 is postponed. If they said that, I would be ecstatic. Like, just...
it's interesting you say that. I was just in Target the other day, and I don't know if anyone has shopped there before, but a lot of times they have those little...
Target.
They have those little bins that are just full of booster packs of like old, obscure, whatever things they can't sell for $1.
Sure.
And yesterday there was a bunch of Final Fantasy packs in there, and I was like, oh.
Really?
Did you snap them up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get them?
No, I don't actually play Final Fantasy.
Yeah,
they were
you should
Opus
get them
7,
and then
I believe.
send them to Dylan. If they're like pennies on the dollar, we'll open them up and give them away to people. I'll pay you for it.
Or we'll just send them to people.
Or we'll just send them to people. Like, literally do that.
What?
There's a lot of people who play Final Fantasy that would love those packs.
That's a great idea. We'll talk about it later. I'll head back to that Target.
Okay, cool. Perfect. I'm gonna.
I want to get in just a little bit more before we. I think we're going to be wrapping to a close here pretty soon. So I have a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, just a note on the last thing. I think it's really tough to gauge any company by their communication policies during this current global state of things.
That was a good point. Yep.
So I wanted to say that it's just a tough time for everyone, and I like to think about how things were like prior to this and kind of gauge based on that. And I think Jasco does a great job compared to other ones, and also I think all of these things we're mentioning aren't necessarily hits on the game. Like, I'm not trying to trash on DBS, even though it sounds like I've tried to do that the past couple episodes. I'm not trying to trash on Jasco for like release a set already. And
secretly,
and
he is.
Dylan's not trashing on Final Fantasy at all.
No, I love Final Fantasy.
But what these are just things that we can look at and sort of try and learn from. No matter what TCG you play, you can look at where things are being done not the best, and when things are being done better than the rest, and kind of compare them and see, how can my TCG start to take these ideas into consideration.
And when you're more intimate with an idea, you can find more issues with it, and sometimes it's easy to balloon those issues. Like Dan said, like if people have listened, I obviously don't dislike the Final Fantasy TCG, but I can pick on it, right? And we don't like the Dragon Ball Super TCG, but we can like, you know, nitpick on like things that we feel other card games have done better. And that's just a quick, like, I just wanted to say that. Like, it's easier to notice, you know, to see the forest from the trees when you're in the woods.
You're always more critical of the things you care about.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So the only other thing I really wanted to talk about here for what I think a game could do best is I think a lot of games could learn from DBS and Digimon, from Bandai in general, in their attention to aesthetic. And whether or not you like, I know Jordan, for example, doesn't like the busy aesthetic of Dragon Ball Super.
Or Final Fantasy.
Really loves the clean aesthetic of Digimon. But either way, when they make a rare card in those games, you know it. Like they go all out. They'll put the gold foil. They've experimented with tons of things, signed cards, different foil versions. They've been doing
neat.
full arts lately. They are going crazy to try and make these cool cards that you want to hunt down. And we are all, I said this in the last episode, we're all junkies. If you play a card game, if you play a trading card game, you're to some degree a junkie. You got to accept it. It's part of the deal. And
inject
put
the
it in
foils
my
into my
veins.
veins.
yes, to that end, when we see shiny foil cards, unless you're that really like weird 1% of people who's like, I just want to play all non-foils. Like there's
Jordan.
Chris Danzel, I think, was like that in our local group.
Chris
or whatever.
Danzel's the same way.
They
Gives
can
you
all be
Very
broken.
utilitarian.
But most people want those shiny, cool cards, want them to look awesome. And this is where I think of the starkest contrast to me is how Panini handles games with foiling and how Bandai handles games with foiling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just rough for Panini. And this comes from my bias, knowing the guys who work behind the scenes and everything. The people in the trading card game division don't want it. They're not like sitting there like, let's put out some bad foils for this set or something, or let's not
Those
not
guys
double
are
check.
incredible.
They're amazing
Like,
people who work on the
wonderful
card games,
people.
and I 100% want people to support them if they like their card games. But there is a management issue where they don't seem to care about going all out to make these a cool piece that you want to hunt down and buy boxes for and stuff.
Which is very much like
Bandai-
executive, right? Like that's the like.
yeah, yep.
That's the
And-
money
and-
people.
That's
Not
the
Bandai, on the
corporate
other
decision,
hand, is
yeah.
like, we're going to make the coolest things. You're not even going to play the game. You're going to see this and you're going to go,
I
wow,
wanna
that
play
looks
that game.
awesome. I want
That's
that.
true. That's true.
And
You-
I think
you know
the
who-
perfect card game would do that for sure.
Yeah. You know who does a really good job? I think the best job of making their cards just look cool is Bushiroad. Their foils are
Oh, yeah.
gorgeous. Like when their JoJo set where they actually put like the sound effects on the cards in gold foil. Oh, those are so cool.
That's
Yeah.
You know,
awesome.
Bushiroad is we never
Never
bring
heard
that
of
up
that.
here because none of us are Bushy players. They make cards
I
by
play
Vanguard,
Weiss.
Weiss Schwartz. They did Future
Weiss
Card Buddy
Gesundheit.
Fight. I think that's done now. But Bushiroad, I feel like Bandai actually took from Bushiroad when they brought Super, because they were doing
Absolutely.
the same stuff of like signed gold stamps
Sure.
and sound
cool.
effect things. They did that in the Clash of Fates set for Dragon Ball Super.
That would be another thing that I would say that the Final Fantasy TCG does poorly. I think they have a lot of awesome looking cards, like god awesome looking cards. Like some of these arts, I mean, they're made like custom art by some of the best artists I've ever seen, and even the non-custom art. Like, they're spoiler alert, Opus 12, they have a Neo X Death coming, and it's going to be a full art dark foil. And God, if you haven't seen Neo X Death, just Google Neo X Death real quick and look at like the coolest art that you're gonna find. That's the art of the card. It is such an impressive. Like Final Fantasy's got some amazing, fantastical art designs, and then they also have theater rhythm cards.
No,
and-
not theater rhythm, please.
They have
DS
theater rhythm.
screen capture
And,
images.
Like,
Yeah, they're
like,
oh man.
So, and that turns a lot of people off, and I wish it didn't. Because like, yeah, it turned Dan off. It turned my friend Dylan Korn off. It turns a lot of people really don't like that. And it was actually funny because in the most recent set, I showed him Dylan 3 of the most influential cards of this set to me, And for people who watch or play Final Fantasy and listen to the podcast, I believe those 3 cards are Braska's Final Aeon from Final Fantasy X.
I've seen you play that a lot.
Ritz from Final Fantasy TA. And with Ritz, Marsh, because Marsh and Ritz are a combo. Yep. And Tyro from Final Fantasy Legends, I believe. Now, the best part about that is all 3 of those cards have totally different card arts. Braska's Final Aeon is this awesome, oppressive, brave Exvius. Like, somebody put a lot of money into this, like, crazy cool painting of, like, rendering this character to be, like, horrifying and obnoxious. And then you've got Marsh and Ritz, which are super clean, kind of a minimalist, painterly style. Very painterly. Wonderful
They're gorgeous cards.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. And then they have Tyro, who I love. I believe is a theater rhythm card. So he might not be a theater, but he's a chibi. And all 3 of them are extremely strong cards. They're extremely they're meta-defining cards that do what they do the best. And all 3 of them have different art styles, and they all go in the same deck. Or like they can go in the same deck rather. Like they so it's not like you have a deck that's all one card art-esque. Which some people get really turned off by that. So like a unification in art design or aesthetic rather. I think aesthetic's a better word for it. I think is important. And I don't know, sometimes I like seeing my chibi characters. I just don't think that bugs me. But I can understand a lot of people that get bugged by that.
Dylan, let me take what you're saying, because I agree with you totally that Final Fantasy has the widest range of different art styles. And if every single card looked like the full art, like Ritz and March and everything do, I would probably be playing the game because I think they look so good.
To be clear, as the game has progressed, there's a lot more of that. Like it is, I would say, like before it was like 40-60, where it was like 40% like cool art or new art and 60% kind of reused assets. It's more 60-40, maybe 70-30 now. Just for people that might be interested.
Yeah, and people should check it out if they're interested in seeing some of those cool looking cards, definitely. And if you sit down and play competitively, you will see Ritz and March plenty.
Yeah,
I understand.
Yeah,
but I wanted to bring up that a game that did a non-unified card frame, but I think had a single graphic design team or designer behind it and made it work really well to the point where like I really enjoy that the card frames alter set to set. Score Dragon Ball Z.
Oh yeah,
I think
those are good example.
Very classic. I mean, they're very classic 2000s. If anyone's a graphic designer, you like look at those and you can tell me what era they're from basically because they're like
absolutely
and the Boo Saga ones.
I know the Boo Saga I think are the most controversial ones of all of them. Where
everything is just pink. It's hard to tell what the style of the card is.
but you know, outside of that one, maybe I think the rest of them are all just like gorgeous, clean. I like the Boo Saga ones for what they are, but like, you know, I understand people not. But I think you can do a game where the frames change, the design changes a bit set to set, but you have to, you just have to nail it. You have to have a unified vision, like you're saying, Dylan. I think a unified aesthetic, which I think they keep the aesthetic despite the design changing.
Somebody link me these controversial Boo Saga, because I just Googled it and I'm not finding anything that looks outlandishly different from like the other score stuff.
Okay, someone add in one more idea while I pull it up.
One thing that I think that I think it's a really simple across the board option that I wish every game would do, and again, Jasco does it. Booster pack redemption. I wish every game did that, and I don't see why not.
I think we could widen that scope, which I believe I 100,000% agree with you. I think you could widen that to just like better promotional systems. That, like, you know,
not just promos,
but yeah, exactly. Not just like a foil card that you can get every once in a while. But I know a lot of new players love like love like a deck mat. You know what I mean? Like a deck mat to play on, like that's exclusive
Yeah.
that they can redeem.
That's one thing
which
I was going to bring
Jasco
up
does.
is the not, I guess not third party. I don't know what the actual term is, but like the like peripheral like pieces of a card game. Because one thing I like, especially once I decide I'm getting
Accessories.
into the card game, I really like having like fancy things. Like one thing I'm excited about Digimon is they have like the memory tracker and stuff, and already basically because they had it in Japan already, they have some fancy things that you could get for like promos.
There
I
you
believe
go.
in Japan they were promos for playing like your weekly tournaments. You'd get hard acrylic, like really nice looking memory counters, and then the little
Ooh.
tokens you use to like track your gauge. There's different ones you can get and collect, and I'm like,
That's
I
cool.
love
That's
little
sick.
things like that. It
Kind
adds
of
a
like what they
premium
tried to do
feel
for
to your
Panini
game.
Z, but like the scouters are
With
just
the little
weird.
swords. Yeah.
or like the
Or-
pin events with UFS.
Yeah, the really nice enamel pin.
The enamel pins didn't do anything for me, honestly. I needed to be a utilitarian
gym
thing. I needed
badges.
to be
I've
something
seen-
I can use, a life tracker.
Final
anger
Fantasy
counter.
has frozen counters. Final Fantasy has like, so when a card's frozen, like you put like a little ice charm on it, so you're like,
Wait, I
it's
thought-
frozen.
Yeah.
Is that new? Because didn't the other
Nice.
day you said you disliked how you
Well,
had to
no,
track? You always have to use dice.
Well, a lot of people use dice. Well, Final Fantasy just recently added counters to the game, but frozen is like it doesn't untap during your next untap step, so it's more of like a field effect than a counter, especially. So that's why like I'm not sure if they were official. I feel like they kind of were, and then like they just didn't really send them widely out because I think they originated in the EU, which is where if for those of you who don't know, Final Fantasy isn't gigantic in North America. It is huge in Europe. The Final Fantasy TCG is the TCG that isn't Magic in Europe. Like it's bigger than Dragon Ball Super. It's bigger than UFS, which isn't like a huge thing. But like Final Fantasy TCG in Europe is really big. It's not like maybe not like Pokemon, but I know it's like really big in Europe. Which I don't know why. I think it's just because their EU team is amazing.
You know what I wish DBS did that they did once and never again? Those hard plastic leader sleeves. I love those things, and I wish they would make more of them.
For side loaders.
Yeah. I still have one, and I've had it for a while, so it's a little scuffed up. It's like, make more of those.
Like Dan said, we're junkies.
Yeah, those are nice.
And we just want more ways to consume our drug.
Exactly.
Give me the shiny.
Give me the shiny spoon.
Okay,
the
guys.
shiny
So I
belt
think,
strap.
You never sent me
I
something.
think that we have talked. We sent you. Yeah, there's
Oh,
in
you
the
did?
chat
Okay.
below. There's two
Perfect.
examples of Busaga. It's just not very good media to consume for our lovely listeners and
Sure.
viewers here because
Very pink.
sending it in the Discord. tag here.
Follow at home,
But-
kids.
You can go ahead and take a look at that and let us know what you think afterwards, Dylan. But I'm going to go ahead and bring this to a close here because I think we actually have a lot to say. And what I'm going to go ahead and say is we're going to do a part 2 of this conversation in a future episode.
Ooh.
So not going to promise it's next week, but what I'd like to do is actually get Mike on again to hear his thoughts on some of this too. And we'll delve into some other topics that we were, I think, starting to get into and wanting to talk more about. I think there's just a lot of really great current practices that other companies can work from, or just things that we didn't talk about, digital platforms or anything like that, things we would like to see
which
for games that
Magic
would
the
make them
Gathering
truly
does
perfect.
incredibly well. I just want to make.
Yes,
I heard
we'll-
one second. I heard a comment of last week. A few people had mentioned to me that they felt like I really didn't like Magic from what I was saying. I enjoyed the hell out of myself playing Magic the Gathering over the last month. Just to be clear, I've got a couple nitpicky issues.
The record has
but
been
it was
set.
but I really enjoyed Magic the Gathering. I should have said that earlier in the episode for
Okay.
people who weren't there at 58 minutes.
We have it on
Instead
record.
of when I'm trying to wind down and close us off here. Thanks, Dylan. Well, no, it's good. It's good to set the records. Great. That's great. And we will definitely have a chance to talk more about all of this in the future. So
Hell yeah, this has
thank
been a
you
good
guys so
episode.
much for listening to this episode of the MetaManiacs show. Stay tuned for more as we discuss this and other great trading card game related topics. Thanks again to Kevin for joining us for another episode of this.
Thank you so
trying to
much
get
for
you on
having me
when
on
we can.
again.
Absolutely. And if you guys like this show, go ahead. I'm going to give you all the usual stuff. Give us a like on the YouTube video down below if you're watching there. Subscribe to the channel. If you are listening to our audio version, make sure you're subscribed on your audio platform of choice. It's on all of them out there. If there's an option to rate us, it helps us get found. If you want to give us a rating, we'd really appreciate that. Hope it's positive, but, be
I'll
honest
give you
with
a
us.
hug at
That's
next
fine.
Gen Con if you want to be it. If you do it and you screenshot it, I'll hug you at the next Gen Con.
That might.
The deal's out there.
I'll do it.
Take advantage. And of course, if you guys really, really like what we do here at MetaManiacs, where we have these podcasts, we have videos, we have written articles, we just cover all sorts of TCGs, we have a Patreon. You can go ahead and donate for just $2 a month. You get access to bonus podcast episodes and other great content. And there's a bunch of other upgrades. You can go check that out there at patreon.com/metamaniacs. And with that all said, we, of course, really love you guys listening in and appreciate you all. And we will see you on the very next episode of the MetaManiacs Show. Take care, guys.
Take care,
God
guys.
bless.
Bye.